They both were like men's men. They loved to box. They would go down in the basement and fight each other all the time, and then they go back up and just like work on policy, homestead acts and timber acts and mineral acts and these kinds of things, and we put them in place and say, go out and conquer more. We've got more ground to take care of. And in my opinion, it's one of the bravest things anyone's ever done. I mean, you have some people thought there might be freaking dinosaurs out there. They had no idea what was still extant in the wilderness. So basically, war and conquest from that point is how we won this land back. I think that's a really important point to start. So it's not me that's doing the blood and soil thing. It's the people who founded this country. War, treaties, purchase. That's how we did it. When somebody asks me, how did we end up with public land? My answer is conquest. War, treaties, purchase. That's how we did it. If you go all the way back to the Articles of Confederation, you can see this idea emerge that the people of the United States who just fought this war to free themselves of a king own this land. Now so at the time, Georgia, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, those states had made claims on land that went all the way to the Mississippi River. So that means that South Carolina, Maryland, places like that are now landlocked. So they're debating these issues, trying to put together a government, while we're winning this war over here. And those 7 states who were landlocked were saying, hey, wait a minute, this is our blood and treasure on the line too. You don't get to just claim all of this extra territory and lock us out of the potential for growth and development and all of that. So the agreement they come to is that we will design state borders and put the rest that we'll cede these other states, colonies at the time, we'll cede that land to the federal government in the public trust for the betterment of this nation moving forward. So that concession was made at the birth of this nation. So that's the first war. Then you go from there to stuff like the Louisiana Purchase. I don't know if you heard, but Napoleon was fighting a whole bunch of people over there, needed some money. And he finally said, you know what, how about I just sell you this whole thing for $15 million? So we buy that. And then you've got other pieces like Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the War of 1812, which eventually ended up with land being ceded to us, the whole 49th parallel stuff from the British government, and both Spanish and Mexico. So basically, war and conquest from that point is how we won this land back. I think that's a really important point to start. So it's not me that's doing the blood and soil thing. It's the people who founded this country. So if you're going to call me a communist, I guess you're going to have to go back to the founding generation and call them a communist, because that's what they thought. Lewis and Clark, no one really knew what we had bought in this Louisiana Purchase. We just knew that it was a good deal, and we had just doubled the size of our country, which seems like a pretty good thing. And they did it for $15 million. It's not like it was a huge expense. Now, we were pretty broke at the time, but either way. So Jefferson establishes this Corps of Discovery to put him out on a grand expedition, and he trusts his friend Meriwether Lewis with this. Meriwether Lewis then recruits his friend from the Army, William Clark, and they put together a team and go out, and what they're looking for is a Northwest Passage. They wanted to find a water source that would run from the Pacific to the Atlantic. So kind of in a way trying to solve the problem that we later solved with railroads, right? So these guys go out. In my opinion, it's one of the bravest things anyone's ever done. I mean, some people thought there might be freaking dinosaurs out there. They had no idea what was still extant in the wilderness. And so they go out and get on this boat, about 50 people or so. I can't remember the exact number of people. And they start pulling this boat up this Missouri River, having no clue what's going to be, at the end of it. The first winter, they winter in Mandan, North Dakota, and they're learning, they're, meeting natives and learning some things from them, making trades with them, scaring the shit out of them with our technology, stuff like that. Trying to make peace where they can, see who they can make peace with and who they're going to have to fight as we institute this whole manifest destiny idea. And then the next year, they go from there to essentially the Rocky Mountains. In fact, so on the way through there, in what is now modern day Montana, they find themselves up against their very first grizzly bear. And I just kind of love this story because Meriwether Lewis, if you read his journals, he's like bragging in there at different points about how he's killed 300 bears. I'm like, I ain't afraid of no damn bear, all this. And then he's out with a few other guys, and they run into this bear that he describes as a white bear. Sometimes grizz can look kind of silvery backed. And there's two. And they're watching him, and they sneak up to about 100 yards, and him and this private both shoot these two bears. And anyone who's black bear hunted before knows, like, what you would expect for the most part is that bear to run away. Well, grizzly is a whole different animal. And the Indians have been trying to tell him this. They called it like the great white bear and stuff, like be careful of the great white bear. And well, they shoot these things and they immediately charge at them. So they're shooting flintlocks. So it's not like they can just empty a mag into them. So they turn and run, and it gets to the point where Lewis has to jump into the Missouri River to try to get away from this bear. It chased him for like 80 yards before it had, and that one that chased him gets all the way to the river and then finally starts to tire and doesn't come in the water after him anymore. The other one had ran toward them and then died. It was hit more in the heart. But then they go back and examine these bears, and he realizes how big they are, and then he writes about how different this place is and how wild and difficult it's going to be to tame. If the bears are this much harder out here, then what else are we going to find? And in the one that chased him, he'd hit it through both lungs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, man. Grizz are no bullshit, for sure. Yeah. So and even in my own life, I like just looking at grizz, but I take them pretty seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of where this stuff starts. And then, of course, eventually they make it back, plenty of adventures along the way, and report back to Jefferson like, hey, this is what we found. There is no Northwest Passage, but there's all this other stuff. And in the meantime, that land that had been ceded to the federal government, they were using some of it to pay off soldiers. If you were a private, I think you could get 100 acres, or if you were an enlisted man, you could get like 100 acres. And then if you were, I think, a colonel or above, you could do as many as 500 acres. And they were kind of starting to expand in that way. Another thing Jefferson realized, I think, was one of the most intelligent or wise parts of the idea of manifest destiny is he understood that we did not have a military that could conquer the amount of terrain that we had. He knew it was not going to be possible. So the next best resource is your American people. The average person is pretty brave and durable too. So we're trying to move them out west and establish new states, provinces, towns, villages, all this kind of thing, farms. And that happens for, another little while. And then just to kind of give a really broad overview of how the lands ended up in the situations they're in, then we do things like homestead acts and timber acts and mineral acts and these kinds of things. And we put them in place and say, go out and conquer more. We've got more ground to take care of. And what happens really quickly with the Homestead Act type stuff is the further west you get, the more arid and austere the ground gets. So now we've got to go from 160 acre Homestead Acts to 300 or 380 or whatever it was, and then all the way up to like sections of land because it takes more land to be able to make a living on. Then we end up, again, I'm just giving you a very broad. Then we end up with a timber baron problem. And it wasn't just the robber baron concept. It wasn't just timber barons. There was, people that were overgrazing and things like that too. But to speak straight to the timber baron thing, they were going out and just clear cutting entire forests. They're trying to make money, man. And there was this idea in America, you see it with stuff like the buffalo too, where this was a totally endless resource that you could never actually extinguish. So I don't even think they were that terrible of people. I really think that they thought there was going to be another timber section and another. And, by the time they got to the end, perhaps this other stuff would have been grown back, I think is kind of their mindset. But that was not what was happening. And then enter a guy called Pinoche, and I could be saying his name wrong, but he was friends with Teddy, and they're part of the Boone and Crockett Club that Teddy put together. And his dad was a timber baron. And instead of passing that business down to his son to go do the same thing, he kind of had this ethos of, you're going to fix the stuff that I screwed up because I overdid this. So he sends him off to forestry school in France, Germany. And he goes and learns about forestry management. And then he comes back and ends up working with Teddy on the preservation of these forests. And this is after, of course, the Forest Act was put in place, I think in 1891. So we'd had a couple of presidents who'd made some national forests before Teddy. But Teddy and Pinoche come in, and they're the ones that really get after it. I think they established like 100 national forests to be preserved. And another thing I love about those two is they both were like men's men. They loved to box. They would go down in the basement and fight each other all the time, and then they go back up and just like work on policy. It's like a barracks, you know what I mean? So like this guy's not a pussy. And I guess I would say he's not a communist either. And this is kind of where the ethos of preservation and protection starts, in my opinion. And that's, again, a broad overview.
That's good. That's good. How much U.S. land in acres is public? No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.